task. It's here. We made it. We made it all the way through to the very end of chapter 4, and now we can focus on the data flow task. Now, believe me, I had a lot of internal debate about which way to kind of flip this around. I know that the data flow task is going to be probably the most popular task you ever work with, if not the predominant task you work with by a 90% margin. But at the same time, I felt I was kind of two minds. Do I start with the data flow task and then work everything around it afterwards? Or do I start with all the other pieces, and that way once we get to the data flow task, then we can do a lot of other real world things in our examples. And that ultimately was why I pushed it to the very end of chapter 4. I wanted to be able to expound on the data flow task without fear of time constraints, or without fear that, oh gosh, I'm going to show that next. Don't talk about the execute SQL task because you're going to talk about that later. Oh yeah, don't talk about FTP because we can't show them that because we're going to do it later. Well, see, we've done all of that. So we can talk about FTP and zipping up files and for each loops because we've covered it all. And from this point forward, everything that we talk about in this course this is how it's done in the real world. This is what you're going to do. You'll download a file, you will zip it up, or unzip it, or whatever it is that we need to do. We've laid the groundwork. We've covered the tasks. We've talked about all the common tasks at this point. We've talked about the basics of logging and auditing. The only really, I can think of three things that we have yet to cover that are coming up in either the next chapter, really the next chapter, and that is number one, variables, number two, expressions, and number three, event handlers and breakpoints. Those are about the only three things so far that we haven't covered. You've got a great foundation already, so let's add to it with the data flow task. So this section is pretty big as well. This in conjunction with the section on doing the bulk insert. These are meant to kind of go together because they are alternatives to each other. So let's just jump in here. Let's talk about the goals of the data flow task. So I'm going to go ahead and start out with just an empty environment. Give me a second to just create a blank little project here. So let it come up, and it's not going to matter. I'll just name the files. And blah, 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 blah. Come on, hurry up, hurry up. I just got a brand new SSD drive here. I'm actually, there's this looking at the box right here. But I'll actually open it because I'm excited. I actually want to see it. If you don't know what an SSD drive, it will, like, this is just a virtual hard drive in VMware is the tool that I use for these. An SSD drive is, I use 10,000 RPM drives for my main system. An SSD drive is going to be more than double that, and that's not even putting it in RAID 0. So I'm very excited. Let's see, I bet it's so tiny. I'm sorry, I'm really excited about my SSD drive. Very, very, how cool is that? Okay, sorry. I'm a geek, what do you want to say? So anyway, data flow task, right? That's what we were talking about, sorry. The reason that I got onto that kick is when I launched the Visual Studio here, because I'm only on the virtual hard drives and because they're only running on 10,000 RPM IDE drives, it's a little slower than it's going to be when I put in my SSD drive. Okay, so back to the data flow task. I ramble sometimes, but I think we're probably 10 to 12 hours into the course at this point. It's okay to ramble every once in a while, kind of break up the monotony of just doing programming, administration, development type stuff, right? So sorry if this is your first entry into my videos, but we've been talking for a while. Okay, the data flow task. By far the one that most developers are going to use day in, day out, package by package by package. You're going to be working with the data flow task. Data flow task has exactly the intent that the graphic implies. You go from a source to a destination. Now, there's a lot of different sources and a lot of different destinations, though, and this is one of the things that makes SSIS so flexible. if there weren't all these other fancy tasks like the script task and the execute SQL task and all the other pieces of the puzzle, SSIS would still be awesome as long as we still had the data flow task. I would use it day in and day out as a developer, and you probably would too. Having those extra tasks is lanyap. If you know lanyap, means a little bit extra. So we're very thankful we have a great task here in the data flow task. Let's go ahead and just take a look at the inner workings here. So you notice that I'm on the control flow side of things. When I flip over to the data flow, you'll see the icons match up here. Now I'm going to treat this video as though you did not watch the previous videos on the data flow task. So in, I think it was chapters 2 and 3, I have shown the data flow task in little bitty pieces here and there, and I talked about the difference between the control flow tab and the data flow tab. That was 8 hours ago, as far as I'm concerned, in our course. So you might have forgotten. Or you might not have actually watched those. You might have come in straight into chapter 4. So give me just a couple of minutes to make sure we are on the same page, that we all are together with this data flow tab versus control flow tab. Okay? We'll talk about event handlers in chapter 5, the next chapter. So the control flow is simply defining which things happen at what point. So like we have, and I'm just dragging stuff at random onto the designer surface here. Okay, so we have a bunch of different things. Maybe we have some containers and blah, 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 blah. So lots of different stuff, right? So we are just defining with control flow, I want that to happen, and then I want this to happen, and then I want that to happen, and this happens on error, and this happens on completion, and you know, if you didn't watch the series on precedence constraints at the very beginning of chapter 4 here, you might, if that looks unfamiliar to you, you might want to go back and review what those are. Just the beginning of chapter 4 here in course 158. So that's your basics of the control flow. You're defining what the entry point is for the package, how many tasks execute in parallel. That's the kind of things that you're dealing with right here. The data flow task, though, notice that I have a bunch of different tasks onto the surface, but only one of them has this little icon right here. And so when I flip over, let's just give it a name. Let's call it Damuva. Okay, so we flip over to the data flow task. Notice that Damuva is the only one listed up here. Okay, because that is a data flow task. If we added multiple data flow tasks onto the environment, this one is another, and this one is boredom, tired of dragging them on at the top here. I go to data flow, you can see that's how we manipulate them. That's how we flip between these. Okay, so the control flow simply defines where it starts, how many things go on at once, what happens on error, success, or completion. And then the data flow is the movement. Okay. Now, yes, I know previous videos we've already talked about how you can do data movement with the execute SQL task or the script task or with the bulk insert task. So we've talked about those, but I'm just going to specifically, when I say data movement now for the rest of this chapter, just really talking about the data flow task. Okay. So what can the data flow task do? Well, let's go into Damuva. So I can double click on it, which flips me over to the data flow task and puts me in the context of that specific data flow task. Well, you have a series over here of sources, destinations, and transformations. So I think it's a fair time. I know I've mentioned it at least 5 or 6 times throughout the course, but just to make sure, again, we're all on the same page, this is our critical ETL-based task. ETL is the extract, transform, and load. That's what ETL stands for. So we're going to define really up here a source, a transformation, and a destination. That's what's going to map. I think that they just didn't like the acronym STD. that much to use in SSIS, and so the ETL is probably the right one to go with there. So source, transformation, and destination kind of match up to your extract, transform, and load. I don't know. That probably gets lost in translation with people from various countries. I don't know. If you didn't find that funny, too bad. Sorry. um, okay, so back over here to the sources. Deep breath. What can we use as a source? Just about anything. Anything that can be that can expose data. We can use, and I'm intentionally not expanding on these right now because I don't want to get caught up in, well, what does that mean? And what does that mean? And he said this, but I don't see that. Okay. Just kind of stay with me at the high level. Next couple of videos are going to detail what the sources are, what each one of them does. Same for the destinations, same for the transformations. Okay. So what can we do? Let's just talk about the sources for a second. What kind of sources are we talking about? Well, we're talking about your common things like a SQL server, any version, an Oracle server, any version, MySQL, and I'm using the big relational databases here, DB2 and Formix. We're talking about smaller systems like Microsoft Access, your desktop databases, Fox Pro, FileMaker, DBase, those types of systems. We're talking about flat files, text files, CSV files, .dat files, if you will. And we're even talking about XML. We're talking about proprietary formats. We're talking about .NET typed data sets or untyped data sets. We can use all of that kind of stuff as a data source. Now, the destinations, it's kind of easier to talk source and destination and then expand on transforms because that's the bigger category. The destinations often mirror what the sources are. You can go from a SQL Server to any one of those things I mentioned before. I can go from SQL Server 2008 to Oracle 10G. I can go from MySQL to a text file. I can go from DB2 to Excel 2003. Okay, so the destinations are often going to match what your sources are. So, SQL Server, Oracle, Excel, Access, text files, lots of different things that we're going to play with in here. And again, I'm intentionally not going through showing the technical terms because the technical terms aren't as sexy as being able to just kind of give you the high level. We'll do the technical terms in the next couple of videos. Now, the transformations is where you will suffer you will spend most of your time. I wasn't kidding. You will suffer. Transformations, I can't say that. That would be politically incorrect. Transformations are hard. You will spend a lot of time on them. You will do it wrong. You'll have it right one day it'll stop working and you'll spend 4 hours figuring it out or give up and look for another way. Transformations are where you'll spend most of your time, most likely if you're doing a lot of data flow based tasks. This is where you're doing things like data quality work. I'm doing data scrubbing. I am getting rid of garbage. I am doing normalization or denormalization. I am merging multiple data sources into a single destination. I'm doing lookups. There's all kinds of things. Again, don't want to get into the details just yet. We will develop into that. So the data flow task is absolutely critical. I cannot oversell it no matter how much I even try because you're going to be using it with such frequency. So I tell you what, instead of going really much deeper on this video, how about we stop here and let's come back in the next video and let's take a look at a real quick data flow task. Let's actually set one up and we'll do like a little 5-minute overview to creating the most basic of data flow tasks before we dig a little deeper.